So here we are. This is the last lesson of this series about Asian theological resources on conflict and reconciliation. And today we will do two things. First, we will finish our exploration of the way reading together the classics, interpreting them, is a path towards reconciliation in Asia. And second, from there, we will go to our general conclusions. So let's continue what we did last time about biblical hermeneutic in China. We were more or less till the time of Cultural Revolution, and we know that after the Cultural Revolution, there was a kind of culture fever, that generated a massive enthusiasm for classics in general as source of meaning. And on such background, there was the emergence of the very much spoken about cultural Christians, Wenhua Jidutu, for which the Bible was seen as a classic through which to tackle and understand phenomena such as radical evil, or basic opposition between good and bad, which Chinese cultural resources were deemed to be reluctant to confront. So the emergence of cultural Christians had to do with a general interest for classics as a source for meaning. From there emerged what is well known, especially in Hong Kong, as a Sino theology that developed out of Zush reading. Sino theology means to give a theological voice to the Chinese people anchored into their own language. So there could be a way of developing a Chinese theological discourse that will challenge professional and Western, both biblical scholars and theologians. The most important thing was to speak about God in one's own language. But already in the middle of the 19th, the movement diverged in several directions. Some of its members integrated church organizations. Others continued to undertake comparative research on the basis of philological and philosophical concepts. Just in the case of someone we are going to speak about a little later, Yang Huilin, who highlights the fluidity of interpretations that characterizes the Chinese tradition and crisscross it with method and concept inspired by the scriptural reasoning movement, aiming at developing a form of textual hospitality. I will develop that in a few minutes. There is another intellectual subcurrent issued from the Wenhua Jidutu, which has recognized its flag bearer in the person of Liu Xiaofeng, whose initial exegetical biblical endeavor was soon recast by the reading of political philosophers, especially very conservative one as Leo Strauss, Carl Schmitt. Liu's shift from theology to politics led him to advocate a reappraisal of Chinese classics. In this positioning, the literary scholar is meant to be the advisor of the prince. Bible studies are integrated into a reinterpretation of world classics that is itself determined by a pre-existing political philosophy. In the case of Liu Xiaofeng, we come resolutely outside the field that interests us in those lectures. Conversion to Christianity multiplied after the 80s through the assessment of the phenomena remains complex. In contrast to a period where Christian belonging was equated with backward mentality, observers were struck by the spread of the phenomena in urban, well-educated strata. Business owners, executives, doctors, professors, teachers were all part of the new converts. this did not go without consequences as to the way of interpreting the Bible and applying it to social and political issues. The shift in China's Christian population triggered a style of biblical reading that was influenced by one form or another of American conservatism, be it prosperity theology, firm adherence to liberal democracy and free markets as fruits of Christian values and worldview. Once the ideological illusion of the 60s and 70s dissipated, the West perceived prosperity could not be separated from its religious tradition. The failure of the Tiananmen movement redirected many of its leaders and participants towards house church activism. We are speaking of a period which is already past now, but it's important to see the evolution, the rapid evolution actually of Christianity and Bible readings from the 1980s onward. In August 2013, at a forum held at Oxford University, Chinese scholars that were representing a wide range of background, Christians, liberals, Confucians, representative of the New Left, worked out a text entitled, probably too optimistically, the Oxford Consensus. It holds to the principles of people consent, fairness, justice, pluralism, fair world order. You don't find references to canons in this text, as all scholars refer to different canons. However, the underlying message is that the Bible can be interpreted in a way that concurs with social and political insight offered by other traditions, at least on the fact that while a nation shares same origins and destiny, its people may diverge as to the path to be followed. So what interests us when we look at last time's lesson and the little addendum, the post-1980 period I just added, is the following. From its introduction to the first Protestant translation onwards, the Bible in China has been the object of a conflict of interpretations. But remember, conflicts can be creative and productive. Three factors at least played a crucial role in this variety of interpretation. Translations were accompanied by the import of Western exegetical methods and results, which historical circumstances made politically loaded. So how were we going to read the Bible? That was the first question. At the same time, the new classic that the Bible was automatically read and interpreted through the rich Chinese hermeneutical traditions. Third, the intensity and scope of the social and political upheaval that China underwent during the last 150 to 200 years had to affect reading strategy. Since the Christian canon were entering China, at the same time the country was confronting Western modernity. So the Bible was coming with Western exegesis, but it could be interpreted through the rich Chinese reading tradition, and the reading of the Bible was blurred by the fact that it came with conflicts engendered by Western modernity. This is a context in which readings occurred. There have been at least 7 ways through which the Bible has been appropriated by China. The Bible, as we have seen from the start with the example of the Taiping Tianguo, has been sometimes read in the line of apocalyptic writing. Okay? And you had apocalyptic writing in the Chinese religious tradition. This reading is now severely prohibited, but it remains virtually present. After the Taiping Rebellion, second mode of reading, the good news was read through a more Confucian prism. The Bible was seen as an agent of change and of renewal, provided that its message of personal cultivation, shuxing, was first solidly anchored into its readers. So, second mode of reading, Bible brings personal cultivation that brings national regeneration. Third, Dutch reading was reinterpreted later on according to changing circumstances. Though interpreting the historical situation, the sign of the time, was key in deciding how to read the Bible. Till today, the sinicization of biblical reading is presented as an objective to be progressively achieved. So political reading is, let's say, openly political reading is a third mode of reading. Against this fourth model, there has been from the 1920s on a fundamentalist reading of the Bible. Its rejection of any political stance became a political stance by itself. It was strongly anchored into a popular and immediate experience of Bible reading. Fifth, after the 1980s, there was a new model of biblical reading emerged that was emphasizing the countercultural elements proper to biblical reading. But this mode has never been unified. It has oscillated between hermeneutical attempts inserted a Christian theological framework and enterprises that make biblical reading dependent on an interpretative strategy extending to world classics. For summarizing this fifth mode of reading, the Bible is a world classics among others, to be read among Indian classics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and so on and so on. Sixth mode of reading, Western-style evangelical readings, one could say American readings, has penetrated a number of family churches. They stress the biblical roots of constitutionalism, democratic values, social ethics. They contrast it to China's contemporary ethos, which should be reformed through exposure to authentic Christian and biblical culture. So this is a family church, I would say American-style biblical reading. Seventh, one could say that independently from all those readings, there are inchoative readings that are all the time developing and that integrate biblical material into discussion of issues having to do with ecology, with migration, with justice, or even with personal ethics. I often have been witness of that. People who have no Christian culture but know something of the Bible will comment with biblical stories or quote when speaking, for instance, this is what I saw, about the way migrants from other parts of China should be integrated in a traditional neighborhood in Shanghai, things like that. So there is a way of adapting all the time the Bible, taking resources into it, which is independent from the fact that you belong to a confession, a confessional affiliation, or to an intellectual or political faction. There is a kind of endless plasticity of the biblical text. But let us say that those 7 modes of readings are all expressions of the way China makes the Bible a part of its spiritual and social quest and does it dialogically, connecting the Bible to a number of other resources, traditions, and ways of thinking. Now, this variety has been one of the reasons, certainly, for which scholars like Liang Huiling have been very much influenced by the current which is called scriptural reasoning, reasoning with a scripture. So this is a current that scholars like Liang Huiling see as a way of proceeding which is fluid and evolving, a process akin to Chinese hermeneutic. So, and once again, scriptural reasoning didn't start in China, but was adopted by some Chinese scholars. It developed in Europe and America as a way of interface scriptural readings. Christian, Jews, Muslims, sometimes members of other faiths, meet to study their scripture together to explore the way in which such study can help them understand and respond to contemporary issues. So how does it work? A participant from any one religious tradition might discuss with the other participant in the circle his or her own readings of the text from his or her own tradition. Discuss with them their attempts to make sense of the text from his or her own tradition. So I can discuss how I understand my text, or I can discuss the way you understand my text. And finally, I can discuss with them how I understand the text that is theirs and not mine. So there are at least three ways of speaking: as having a special relationship to the text, as listening to the way or discussing the way people discuss of a text with which I have a special relationship, or myself discussing a text, a classic, with which other people have a special relationship. In the practice, when interlocutors meet, people whose beliefs are based on different scriptural traditions, they are not asked to focus on areas where they will agree more or be obliged to hide their beliefs. It is only about providing a context in which we can access a clearer awareness of the others, expressing from the one to the other in a renewed way. Disagreement is not a barrier. Neither is it assumed or sought for consensus among participants as to how they understand the nature or interpretation of the text. For instance, participants should not assume that the Bible fulfills the same role for Christians as the Quran for Muslims or the Tanakh for Jews. So there is really a freedom of meeting in which one does not assume commonalities, but one is not looking for conflict or building at any price consensus either. So groups that practice scriptural reasoning strive to maintain an ethics of what they call mutual hospitality, each participant being both host and guest, alternating the task of leading and facilitating. The evolution in understanding, in the praxis, in the way of listening, seems to be the very objective of the exercise. The exercise is to be mutually transformative. No goal fixed, except the way that we are all changed by the very way of persisting in the exchange. This is actually close from hermeneutics, has been developed by Gadamer, this German philosopher, from the 1916s onward. Gadamer hermeneutics is rooted in the examination of a historical sequence. In his case, he thinks about the way in the second half of the 18th century there were methods instituted, employed by the natural science, through which to judge the progress recorded in the knowledge of man's nature and social being. So Gadamer starts from a moment when natural science becomes the paradigm for social science. Or for taking another example, Michel Foucault in Words and Things want to escape from a reflection centered on the meaning of ideas. He wants to question the mental system in which those ideas are produced. But Foucault proceeds by means of a historical review. He has to start from historical moment. What does it mean for us? It means that founding a theological approach that takes into account a plurality of textual massifs, language, mode of source, constitute an attempt which can start from the entry into a historical phenomenon, as we looked at the way Bible was historically anchored into Chinese political concept. So a phenomenon marked by a rupture, like happened to China in the 20th century. And it builds on it so as to make theological language a matter less of comprehension than of intercomprehension. So let's say it again. When we meet in history. We know that ruptures have intervened that explain the way we refer to a classic. And we try to understand what is the memory, the sensitivity of all participants in the exchange. So we want to comprehend not only the text, but to intercomprehend our mutual understanding of our text and the text of the other. We understand text and classic, ours and the one of the other, historically and dialogically. And we bet on the fact that God reveals himself in history, as the Bible actually tells us from the start. It is through the history of the Israeli people that God comes to the fullness of revelation. And the Spirit continues the same work today. So we have tradition. We need to give renewed meaning to the text through our tradition. We do not always feel its importance because what changes, it is what changes that is seen, while what does not change is easily forgotten. Our relationship to tradition is felt today in a broken fashion, says Gadamer. We see that we have escaped tradition, but we are ignorant of the way we are still connected to our tradition. Tradition is expressed in our classical text. Tradition calls us to regain the consciousness of the world from which we come and in which we are still constant, taking into account all the unsourced, all the unconscious that supports our sourced. And the exchange with the other help us to enter into our own unconscious. Reason, after all, is not its own foundation. Reason illuminates the origins, the dark background of humanity from which it comes. Critical work is always work on our limits, including the limits of critical reason itself. So we don't want to read the classics reasonably. We want reason and critical spirit help us to better understand in which way we are related to them and to make the other also understand this, as we want to understand how the other also are emotionally connected to their own classics, emotionally and historically. The two go together. Texts are still carriers of a world that it addressed to us in the present. To understand is a verb that denotes more than the subjective operation of an I. To understand requires to recognize myself inserted in a process of transmission, where the past and the present constantly meet. I understand in such way because other people have understood and still understand in that way. I am part of a process of transmission and understanding. Hermeneutic is participation in a common meaning. When we read and interpret the Bible, we are participating in the building of a common meaning, a meaning built in a dialogical way by checking whether my understanding meets that of the other, which doesn't mean identify with it, but meets with the other. The other maybe doesn't understand the text my way, but he understands the way I understand it. We generally progress in our understanding of a work by deepening our distance from our initial belonging and from our pre-understanding of the works that obscure our access to it. And it is a dialogue with others that helps me both to understand my relationship to a text and to take distance from my understanding. Through dialogue, I get to a completely renewed relationship to my text, to my classic, to the Bible, for instance. As Gadamer says, as soon as we understand in a different fashion. When I say, oh, I understand, it means that suddenly I have taken a new distance, I have received a new light on what was familiar to me. To be in dialogue is to sing with others and to return to oneself as to someone else. Through dialogue, I become my own other. I am the other of myself. We need to supplement what I just said through what we have seen in the past lessons. First, the variety of dialogical styles of the others leads us to study the logic of each according to their family resemblances. We have many ways of dialoguing. Dialoguing styles develop in different contexts. The fact that the dialogic styles come together and are transformed modify the very modalities of the encounter. A common habitation of the world, we are living in the same world together, virtually leads to the emergence of a meta-dialogical style by the confluence of dialogical styles in contact. In China, at the end of the Ming Dynasty, the beginning of the Qing, the rituals and the way of reading the text were woven and transformed together. We have seen that. Chloe Starr said it. Chinese Christian theology embarked on its own process of transformation into a local textual religion. And this continues till today. But we can go one step further and, thinking about myself becoming the other, see theology as a migration. After all, the experience of a nomadic God, of a God who migrates with his people, is the most fundamental in the Bible, calling Abraham to live as a nomad. Jacob's fly, and the sky opens up in front of him, bringing the people out of Egypt, walk in the desert. The exiles with the alliance takes a new dimension, opens up to the universal. God migrates, his people with him, and then the knowledge of God is progressing in the migration. Dialogical styles that meet together is only a continuation of this process of migration through which I am called to know God who always escapes me, who always goes ahead, further. Same thing in the New Testament, flight into Egypt, Jesus walking from the end of Palestine to Judea. Jesus who says in John 16:7, it is good for you that I am going. He reveals himself in emptiness of the tomb, in fleeting, dazzling appearances. He disappears before the eyes of the disciples, and the proclamation of the gospel to the whole world, leaving Jerusalem, start with a flight out of Jerusalem that the deacon Philip and his companions undertake. It's never settled. Migration always starts again, and the knowledge of God goes further by looking to a God who always is escaping us. From this point of view, it is significant that Christianity has experienced its full historical development outside its native land, that it finds its most dynamic expression outside the land of old days. Christianity, in part, now grows in parts of Africa, Latin America, Asia. There is a force which pushes the theological discourse to always come out of itself, while it becomes empty when it stays in its old setting. It becomes without relevance or inner energy once its expression becomes too installed. What we know about God can never be installed, intellectually or geographically. Though the cross-cultural exploration that opens up a new understanding of theological discourse is realized in history only. A religion has to admit that it is particular, one among others. We feel it very much as Christian in Hong Kong, mainland China, and so on, in the whole of Asia, actually. We are one amongst others. Whenever a civilization like a religion expresses something as a weakness inherent with contingency, then it makes itself communicable. If I am one among others, I become communicable because I am marked by the same fragility as my counterparts. As it acknowledges its weakness, it admits to experiences a lack that only the experience received from the other will allow not to feel, but to transform into a path of continuous exploration. The other helps me, my weakness, to go further in my quest of God. I am starting this quest of God from my tradition. My tradition will always be with me, but at the same time, I will need at some point travel companions. So I think from all I have said, we can enter into the general conclusions to those lessons. We have studied Asian theology as a pool of resources that may help not only believers, but any group to confront violence and to foster peace building. The resources taken into account by Asian theology are two kinds: biblical narratives, cultural riches, ritual, classic stories, proper to each of the local theologies that grouped together are called Asian theology. And these resources are crisscrossed. Biblical narratives can be read through an hermeneutic inspired by cultural resources, and local resources can be reinterpreted according to biblical hermeneutic. We have seen that there are tensions between Asian theology. We have seen especially the gap between Chinese and Indian theology, but there are also common themes. The one of harmony, whatever its polysemy, is an important marker. The one of interrelatedness, which constructs with mainstream Western ontology, is another one. And there is a strong affinity between harmony and interrelatedness, as eventually harmony flourishes when interrelatedness and what it entails are fully understood and accepted at the personal, social, and cosmic level. Violence and conflict are seen as ruptures in the nexus of interrelatedness. each time that the way we are intrinsically connected to the whole of society, the cosmos, God, is rupture, violence, and conflict arise. And Christ, in Asian theology, is the one who reveals, heals, and brings to completion interrelatedness. Jesus, a poor Asian peasant, is seen as the image of all the victims of institutional violence. Jesus vanquishes violence by testifying to the healing power of a life force that originates from the divine energy from which all living phenomena originate. There is, after all, a self-generating power in life. Chinese say shang shang bushi. But there is also a self-defeating power in violence, in death, that justify to hold fast faith and love. Violence often seems to be the strongest, but violence has itself a kind of virus that makes it eventually destroy itself. There are some scriptural bases inspiring Asian theologies that we would like to have a look at the end. Colossians 1 first. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together, interrelatedness. He is the head, the beginning, the firstborn, for in him all the fullness was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile all things for him, making peace by the blood of his cross, whether those on earth and those in heaven. Cosmic harmony. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind because of evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his fleshy body through his death, to present you holy, without blemish, and irreproachable before him, before God. Well, all those connotations go very well with the path we have been following among Asian theology. We know Ephesians 2, he is our peace, he who made both one and broke down the dividing wall of enmities to his flesh, that he might create in himself one new person in place of the two, establishing peace, might reconcile both with God in one body through the cross, putting that enmity to death by him. He came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. So remember what FABC says. The Pauline writing, we just read, present harmony in terms of reconciliation and recapitulation. To express this idea, Paul uses the term catalasine, which means a change from the estrangement to friendship with God. Hence, the church is a community of restored humanity, the icon, the same word, of God. Well, catalasine, this Greek word actually has resonances with what we have been speaking about. Originally speaks of any kind of exchange of one thing with another, change money, catalasine. But already in classical Greek, a specific kind of change, changing enmity, hatred into friendship. You change hate, the ran, of which Korean theologian was speaking last time, into friendship. And the New Testament, it is reconciliation between humankind of God. Catalasine is a restoration of interrelatedness. All things can be exchanged without any obstacle to it. We have seen also the concentration of language offered by Asian theology. Of course, they are diffident to the power of language, at least as a vehicle for reason. There are things that escape language. Those are things that things can be approached rather than defined or expressed through language. Metaphorical, narrative language has a special function to play. And this attitude has antecedents. Let me remind you again of this beautiful word by the Sri Lanka theologian Pieris. Harmony between words and silence is a test of Asian authenticity. Indeed, it is a spirit, the eternal energy which makes every word spring from silence and lead to silence, every engagement spring from renunciation, every struggle from restfulness, every freedom from discipline, every action from stillness, every development from detachment, every acquisition from non-addiction. If there is harmony between our speech and our silence, whether in worship or service or conversation, dialogue maybe, the Spirit is amongst us. This is what Pieris calls the Asian sense in theology. And this is the same thing that Pieris says in the same article: the method cannot be severed from the goal. The way I connect together silence and word, dialogical understanding of the other and silent service of him, that makes me closer to knowing God. So evangelization in Asia could not be separated from living dialogue with the poor, dialogue with culture, and dialogue with other religious traditions. We could see that through the theme of ritual. Ritual, I have said already, is very close from dialogue. And we see that in Confucius. The way I communicate with the other is to be marked by respect. The man who lives according to humaneness and ritual observance can be compared to one of the sacred vessels in which the ritual offerings are offered as appropriate. When speaking to the other, when performing ritual, I transform myself in a sacred vessel in which an offering, my offering to the other, can be brought. The man who follows the way is a holy vessel. We have something similar actually in Christianity. The essence of Christian rituals is found in the sharing of the meat, of the meal, of the bread, of the wine. Remember Colossians. When you meet in one place, then it is not to eat the Lord's Supper the way you eat it now. For in eating, each one goes ahead with his own supper, and one goes hungry, while another gets drunk. This is not ritual. The ritual dinner of Eucharist includes the sharing of the bread and of the cup, and it illustrates the unity and solidarity active in the community. Otherwise, its central sequence will be meaningless. The sharing of bread manifests generosity, spirit of justice. Paul is concerned about the disunity of the community of Corinth, which is expressed by the fact that the various fractions take their meal separately. So Paul considers the bread as the symbol of the meal, of all the goods to be shared between all, and also of the community which constitutes the body of Christ. So 1 Corinthians, one should not go hungry while another gets drunk and another is hungry. So we can see a kind of intermingling of rituals that can happen when the essence of ritual is understood. This is why, for instance, in October 2019, the Vietnamese bishops have encouraged local Catholic family in the practice of having ancestor altar, in sharing of family ritual, of respecting the dead and expressing their faith in the resurrection of Christ. Okay? So the sharing of meal and rituals that honor the defunct can be done because the best of its spirit meets with the essence of Christian ritual, sharing and expressing our hope in life everlasting. So sharing common ceremonials defines a fellowship of community. Maybe we cannot fully partake in the same rituals. Still, for instance, Confucianism and Christianity have approached ritual in a way that allows them to proceed from their letter to the spirits. Rituals are a path toward full humanization that is based on social sharing, refinement, gratitude toward previous generation. So sharing in ritual conviviality translates into a new dialogical style, and reciprocally, dialogue constitutes one of the ritualized expressions through which our social and spiritual space becomes enlarged. And this last example may be a general lesson. We have seen how fragile is ritual, how hard it is to share in rituals, how hard it is to hold the commonality of ritual, and at the same time, how much reconciliation goes to respect rituality expressed through meetings in which we can share in meal, in ritual expression, and in the spirit that once animates us, of what animates us. So maybe it is by its frailty, by its open-endedness, that its dialogical style that leads it to be challenged and continually transformed, that Asian theology proves to be a vessel for peace building and reconciliation. Asian theologies can contribute to reconcile people of different creeds, of different backgrounds, of different opinions throughout the continent, not because it is strong, but because it is weak, frail, open-ended, but provides a space in which dialogue, ritual, sharing in silence, all these can be shared and provoke a mutual transformation that leads me at the same time to better understand the other and to enter into the knowledge of God. If Asian theologies keep this frailty as a defining element of what they are, they will be fruitful all throughout the continent.